Welcome to AC Today. In this episode, we're at our Rehoboth Church in Reading, Pennsylvania, where they dedicated the whole month of February to the theme Healthy and Happy. As the name suggests, they focused on mental health and wholeness for all 4 weekends. This particular weekend, which was the third Sabbath, the program began with a spirit-filled praise and worship service. I just love their praise team. Congregants were also encouraged to greet one another and welcome each other with hugs and smiles. After a series of prayers, it was time to transition into the worship program of the day, which followed a slightly different format. Armina, Domingue, and Brandy of Azulay Consulting were the facilitators for the day. This was actually their second presentation for the month, as they had been there to jumpstart this mental health awareness the first week. After polling the church, they decided that this time they were going to focus on grief based on the results of this survey.
Each and every one of us, if we have not already, will experience a major loss. And so today we've come to talk together about what that looks like. When we were trying to figure this thing out, Brandy, we were like, that's a rabbit hole. Grief and loss is so big. And when you start to pick it apart, you literally can be at it for hours because it's intense as intense can be. It is as vulnerable as vulnerability gets, and it is as intimate as intimacy gets.
Brandy broke down what grief really looks like.
Grief encompasses the range of unpleasant emotions that occur after a loss. Grief is most associated with death, but many other types of loss can result in differing levels of grief. It can be a strong and overwhelming emotion. You can feel numb and separated from your daily life. Everyone can understand this natural reaction to great loss, yet the experience is also uniquely personal, so it doesn't look the same on everyone.
And Armina then used dominoes to demonstrate the two types of loss, primary and secondary.
What happens when the first domino tips? Everything falls. Is there anything that is sort of saved from the fall? If you're in that line, you are going where? Down. And so that is essentially the primary and secondary loss that we're talking about. That first domino is primary, and everything that comes behind it is secondary.
And to illustrate this concept of primary and secondary loss further, Brandy and Armina both shared their own personal stories of grief.
So I arrived there, and then I got out the car, and everybody's standing outside, and then I go up, and that's when they tell me my uncle, who was a state trooper at that time, he told me my dad had died in an accident. And it was like the most horrific accident because he battled with drugs for a very, very long time. And that night, he was at his wit's end. And I got the phone call after the fact. My grandmother, which is his mom, she was telling us that he had called her, was on the phone with her, crying and sobbing because he just didn't know what to do. And so in his disarray, this is him driving into essentially traffic, which kind of knocked him off the road. And this is at night. So instead of staying in the car, he comes out and gets knocked down by a car. And so I just remember saying to myself, like, okay, it's one thing that he's gone, but why so horrific?
My loss happened on December 31st, 2012. Now, what happens in the Adventist Church on New Year's Eve? What do? Right. Watchman service, right? We come together right before sunset. We start with prayer. We have a little service. And then in my household, we would go to someone within the family's house for like a big game night, food, and we would hang out until the ball drops. The night before, December 30th, let me back up. I should back up, right? I've been married before, and I'm in my second marriage, but my first husband died suddenly. So not only was I like in this state of shock, denial, anxiety, but I didn't learn right away that answer. And so that happened, and my life as I knew it turned upside down from that moment.
Through the course of their presentation, they also made it a point to emphasize the stressors and grief that children experience on a daily basis, as well as how we should respond.
So when your child comes home and says, I'm stressed, I'm sad, I'm upset, please don't let your knee-jerk reaction be, what do you have to be stressed about? That may be your thought. It doesn't have to be what comes out. Do you guys remember the phrase I told you to ask your kids? Tell me more. Tell me more.
Following the service and a fellowship lunch, I was able to sit down with the presenters and talk to them about the whole experience and what they hope to accomplish.
First of all, tell us what Azulay consulting means.
Yeah, so the word Azulay for us means warrior. So when we talk about that, we're talking about equipping individuals with all the tools that they need to deal with life's challenges. Because we know life, and my statement is life be lifing. So loss, stress, all of that, our mission is to equip individuals with tools that they can use to cope with those challenges.
Okay, awesome. Mm-hmm. So we know that you all have done a 2-part series. The first part of your series here at Rehoboth, what was that about? Give us a kind of an overview of what you all discussed with the members.
So we were just trying to normalize mental health, because if you think about it, you're always meeting people, you're always feeling and experiencing things. And so sometimes it helps to know you're not alone. Mm-hmm. So we talked about some Bible characters who had what we would call today mental health, and just kind of breaking the stigma around mental illness, that it's not this thing where you just pray people out of, but it's this thing that there are people on earth to help cope, manage, and deal with that. So first time we were here was on the 4th, and we did a 2-part just about that. And what we loved about what Pastor Kelly is doing here at Rehoboth is that he's trying to help spread the word that Jesus and therapy, or Jesus plus therapy, equals healing. And so we kind of did a untraditional or non-traditional service where we had questions and answers, and we engaged the congregation, and then we did that for AY as well. Mm-hmm. And so here we are today talking about grief and loss. And what does that look like, right? What does it look like to lose a person? What is primary grief and loss, and what is secondary? And so we did primary and secondary in the morning, and then this afternoon we're going to talk about how to now cope. Now you know what grief and loss looks like. So how do we cope with that?
You talked about trying to normalize mental health, and specifically in churches. What are some of the challenges you've seen with churches as it relates to dealing with and talking about mental health issues?
I think it's the connection of, what you learn biblically in relation to your natural human responses. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of goes from that angle of, it creates a conflict there, because it's almost like, well, I have to do this because this is what I've been taught and raised up on. Mm-hmm. So I shouldn't be feeling this over here. And so our first part, like Armina said, was all about normalizing those feelings, because at the end of the day, we have all these biblical figures that we went through who have felt depression, who have thought about suicide, who have been stressed. And those are all feelings that we feel just going through everyday life. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the things where, you have people who are ready to have those discussions. And then for some people, it's still a challenge. And then, just feedback that we got from today when we're talking about grief and loss, it's hard. It puts people in a very vulnerable state that we don't want to feel.
Right.
And so, our work is always, we're going to challenge people to feel. Because that's typically what we like to do. If something feels uncomfortable, then we want to step away from it and we don't want to feel it. But that's when we merge the two together, because if we have God, then we know that He's with us. He's omnipresent, so He's with us all the time. So we can walk through whatever those feelings are. We don't have to run away from them.
Right. And the other thing too is, we've been taught in our church that all you need is Jesus. And if you show feelings or emotions, then there's a lacking of something in the relationship with you and Jesus. And so we all feel, right? Like God is an emotional God. He feels, we feel. I think of when He showed up to raise Nazareth from the dead. Like He went with the mission to raise Nazareth and got there and started weeping with Mary and Martha. So there's multiple stories in the Bible that talks about how God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit shows up in emotional spaces. But for the churches, we feel once we've accepted Christ as our personal Savior, then everything else, like life don't life no more. And so we find some of the struggles with the church. It's like, well, they don't know how to merge the two. And so what we say to the leadership team or the leader is, that's not your job. You bring us in and we'll merge the two. And so far it's been very successful. This is not our first rodeo. We, 2 years ago, we did the Emotional Healthy Church for the Delaware Valley. And so through there, we had 6 series where we talked about mental illness and we talked about ways to cope and manage it. So the challenge that we find is they want us to come in, but they don't know how to necessarily bridge the two, because some churches or some Christians still feel if you need a therapist, then there's something wrong with your
You're
faith.
not trusting God.
Yeah.
I think you guys are kind of helping to break that mentality. So if people are watching right now and want you all to come to their church, how do they reach out to you?
So we are on Instagram under Azulay Consulting Group. You can also visit, we have a web email address as well that is hello@azulayconsultinggroup.com. And Azulay is spelled Azulay.
Azulay.
Yes.
And if you know any of us personally, you can reach out to us.
I mean,
as
you can
well.
look our names up. I know we've had people just look us up on
on the good old
social-
Dr. Google.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good old
And,
doctor. Yeah, we'll pull up there too.
and we're also in private practice as well. So not only do we do training and development as a team, but individually we also provide individual counseling, family counseling. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Armina and Brandy, we thank you for being willing to help our churches deal with something that we always haven't been too open to dealing with. And so we appreciate what you're doing. And we hope that more of our churches will reach out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I also had the opportunity to speak to Elta Henry, one of the ministry leaders who helped coordinate the event.
Now we're here with Elta, who serves as the clerk and the communication director here at Rehoboth. And she had a lot to do with kind of putting this series together. But tell us why it was important for Rehoboth to do something healthy and happy for the month of February.
Well, I will give credit to our pastor, Pastor Dorian Kelly. We started this initiative last year where we used some of our local mental health professionals and some within our conference. And we just wanted to carry that through, especially because of the pandemic. And also we've had personal losses, different things as far as adjusting to hybrid church and different transitions that we've had to go through. And we wanted to destigmatize mental health, we'll say, and mental wellness. We haven't even used the term mental illness because it's just as important as any chronic condition. So we wanted to really make it and normalize it for our church, for our young people. And he's really taken that on and we've embraced it wholeheartedly. So to have Azulay come in, and that's resilience, I believe, counseling.
Warrior. I learned it. Warrior.
Yes. And Candor Counseling combined with Armina and Brandy, it's been amazing. They've met us where we were. They asked us what we need. and they've provided it, and we're so grateful.
Okay, awesome. Now, one of the things you guys have done, usually churches will have these types of things, but maybe as a seminar in the afternoon, but you all have dedicated the whole worship service to this type of presentation. Why was it important to put such a big emphasis on this?
You know, to be honest, some people don't come back in the evening. We needed it to be a non-traditional service when people came out. And we didn't really warn them that it was going to be this type of service.
Okay.
So you can say we blindsided people, but it was for their benefit, and
Right.
people really embraced it. We see the same people that came not knowing it was going to be this way. They came back for the second session, which was a week in between.
Right.
They came after, knowing that they were going to be back, and they came with an open heart and open mind, ready to interact.
Okay.
And we're about to get started
Yes,
this year.
I see. One quick question. What do you think, what do you hope people are going to take away from this series?
They're going to have more knowledge. They're going to be proactive rather than reactive. We're not going to judge those that may have issues with mental health concerns or maybe acting a little out of the ordinary. We'll ask them, what do you need me to do? Rather than assuming what we need to do.
Awesome. Well, I applaud you all on putting together such a wonderful program, and thanks for inviting us. This
Thanks
is
for
great to
coming.
see.
Then it was time for the afternoon session, which was a time for all attendees to ask their own questions about grief and their experience. What a transformational experience. And though it was an unconventional service, attendees were ministered to in a way that allowed them to move closer to living healthy and happier lives. Thank you for watching AEC Today. We'll see you in the next episode.